An old woman sat beside a broken wagon wheel. She was on the edge of the frozen road, and her breath came out in small, white clouds. She didn't call out. She didn't beg. She just waited. The sun hadn't even thought about climbing the horizon, but the road into the town of Salvation Ridge was already awake. It was awake, and it was cruel. First came a merchant's wagon, rattling so hard the tinned food inside sounded like bells. The driver saw her. His eyes, small and hard, met hers for half a heartbeat. He saw the broken wheel. He saw her threadbare shawl. Then he whipped his horses. He whipped them faster, and the wagon rolled on, kicking up frozen dust that settled on her like a shroud. She didn't react. She just pulled the shawl, full of holes, a little tighter. Next came a family in a buckboard. 3 children, pale and thin, huddled under blankets in the back. One of them, a little girl, pointed a mittened hand. "Mama!" The mother didn't look. She yanked the child's hand down, pulled all 3 children close, turning their faces away. "Don't look," she hissed. "It ain't our trouble." The father stared straight ahead, his jaw set so tight it looked like it might crack. The wagon creaked past. Still the woman waited. A trapper came next, his wagon piled high with stiff, frozen furs. He slowed his horse, looked her up and down. He spit a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the snow, just inches from her feet. Then he laughed a short, barking sound and moved on. 4, 5, 6 wagons, a circuit preacher on a tired mule. He actually stopped, pulled out a Bible. He read a passage about the poor and the meek, his voice loud and hollow in the freezing air. He told her to pray for deliverance. Then he kicked his mule and rode on. He never once offered a hand. 10, 11, 12 wagons. Men on their way to the logging camps, men on their way to the saloon. Each one saw her. Each one looked away. She became a landmark, a piece of the scenery, a broken woman by a broken wheel. Finally, the sheriff came. He came at a trot, his silver badge catching the first, pale, watery light of dawn. He slowed his big gray horse, but he didn't get down. He just tipped his hat. "Can't help every soul, ma'am," he said. His voice was flat as the plains. He pointed west, up the road. "Town's that way, if you can make it." He knew she couldn't. He was telling her to die tidily. Then he rode on, his duty done. The wind picked up, sharp as a razor. Frost clung to the woman's eyelashes. Her hands, bare and red and split, rested on a small burlap sack in her lap. It was everything she owned in the world. She had been seen by 17 wagons. 17. And she was still alone. Then a new silhouette appeared on the eastern ridge, a lone rider. He wasn't moving fast. He wasn't in a hurry. He stopped his horse at the top of the ridge, and he just watched. He studied the scene below. The woman, the broken wheel, the frozen road that had swallowed 17 other souls without stopping. He sat there for a long, long time. Then, slowly, he dismounted. His boots crunched in the frozen dirt. He led his horse down the slope, one careful step at a time. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He walked right past her to the broken wheel. He knelt beside it, ran his gloved hand over the split hub. He examined it, his face thoughtful. Then, and only then, he turned and looked into her eyes. He saw something there. He saw the same thing he saw in the mirror every morning. He saw the end of the line. "Don't trouble yourself, mister," she said quietly. Her voice was steady. It was proud, even after everything. "Ain't no trouble, ma'am," he replied. His voice was low and rough. He stood up, took off his glove. He offered his bare hand. She hesitated. She looked at his hand, then back at his face. She was looking for the catch. Everyone has a catch. He just waited. Slowly she took his hand. Her fingers were ice. "Name's Grant McCoy," he said. "Ruth," she whispered. "Ruth Winslow." Grant McCoy had stopped when no one else would. And that single choice, that choice was about to set the entire town of Salvation Ridge on fire. A man who won't stop for the weary. He ain't worth the dust on his boots. That's what Grant's father used to say. Grant figured that was about as true as scripture. He'd almost been number 18. He'd seen the others pass. He'd seen the sheriff. He'd started to ride on, too. But then he saw her hands. They looked just like his mother's hands, right before the end. That's what stopped him. He put Ruth on his horse, wrapped her in his own bedroll, and he walked beside her, leading the horse into town. He didn't care what they thought, but they were already thinking. By mid-morning, every eye on Main Street was watching. Every curtain twitched. Every face in the general store window was turned to the glass. Grant McCoy, the widower, the silent rancher, walking a beggar woman on his own horse. Whispers followed them like crows. Who is she? Where'd he find her? He's lost his mind. Grief's finally taken him. Grant ignored them. He walked straight to the land office. He helped Ruth down, and she stumbled. She hadn't had food in days, but she didn't lean on him. She stood on her own. He opened the door. The clerk, a nervous, jumpy man named Polk, looked up over his spectacles. His eyes went from Grant to the woman, and back to Grant. Polk started to stammer. "Mr. McCoy, sir, what can I—" "What?" "I'm buying land," Grant said simply. Polk visibly relaxed. "Oh, just business." "Yes, Mr. McCoy, of course. Which parcel? Looking to expand?" "That 10-acre parcel on the north side," Grant said. "The one at the edge of my range." Polk's face fell. "Oh, that one. Sir, are you sure? That's not good land, Mr. McCoy. It's rocky. The creek runs dry. Nothing grows." "I know the land," Grant cut him off. "Pull the map." Polk, sweating now, pulled out the big plat map, spreading it across the counter. He found the parcel. "Right here, sir. 10 acres. As you said." He dipped his pen in the inkwell. "And the deed. In your name, of course." "No," Grant said. The word just hung in the air. Polk's pen stopped, hovering over the paper. Ink dripped onto the blotter. "I'm sorry." "The deed," Grant said, his voice calm and level, "will be in her name." He pointed to Ruth. Polk's jaw dropped. He looked at Ruth, who was staring at a crack in the floorboards. She looked like she might faint. In her name," Polk whispered. "Ruth Winslow," Grant said, loud enough for the whole office to hear. You're buying it. For her." Grant leaned in, just a little. His eyes never left Polk's. "Is that a problem?" "Well, it's highly irregular, sir. We have ordinances. She has no." "Is it?" Grant said, even quieter. "A problem, Mr. Polk?" "No, sir," Polk squeaked. "No problem at all." Grant reached into his coat. He pulled out a leather pouch. He untied it and poured a stack of gold coins onto the counter. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Paid in full," Grant said. Polk's hands were shaking so bad he could barely write. He filled out the deed. Ruth Winslow, 10 acres, paid in full. He pressed the county seal into the hot, red wax, his hands slick with sweat. He pushed the paper across the counter. Outside, on the boardwalk, the town matrons, the wives of the men who had passed Ruth on the road, stood watching through the glass. Their lips moved behind their gloved hands. The judgment was already beginning. Ruth took the deed. She took it with both hands like it was a holy text. She stared at her own name, written in neat script. She said nothing, but her throat worked like she was swallowing something sharp. She owned land. For the first time in her life, she owned the ground beneath her feet. It was 10 acres of wind-swept, snow-covered nothing. but it was hers. Grant didn't let her linger. He touched her elbow. "We're not done," he said. He led her out of the land office, right past the staring women. He didn't even look at them. He walked her down the street to his livery barn. The smell of hay and warm animals hit them as they went inside. He walked her past the stalls, past his own prized gelding, past the draft horses. He walked her all the way to the back, to a small, warm stall. Inside stood a gentle-looking brown milk cow, heavy with calf. "This is Mercy," Grant said. "She's gentle. Due to calve come March. She'll give enough milk for you and some left over to trade." Ruth just shook her head slowly. Her eyes were full. I can't," she whispered. "This is too much. I can't." "You can," Grant said. "I'll pay you back," she said, her voice stronger now. "Somehow. I'll work. I'll—" "The debt's already paid, ma'am," Grant said softly. "You just don't know it yet." She looked at him then. She really looked at him, searching his face, searching for the catch, for the cruelty that was always hidden inside a kindness this big. But his eyes were steady. They were sad. Saddest eyes she'd ever seen. But they were honest. "Land don't lie," Grant said quietly. "It either holds you up, or it lets you fall. Yours will hold." They walked together to her land. He led the cow. She clutched the deed. It was a mile out of town. When they got there, it was just like Polk said. Rocky, windswept, bare. The wind howled over the ridge, and there wasn't a single tree to stop it. Grant tied the cow's lead to a scrub brush. Ruth walked to the center of the 10 acres. She stood there for a moment, the wind whipping her thin hair around her face. Then she knelt. She pressed her bare, chapped hand flat against the frozen earth. Her shoulders started to shake. Not from the cold. Grant watched from his horse, giving her the moment alone. When she stood up again, her face was dry. But something had shifted. Something had changed in her forever. She had ground beneath her feet. She had a cow. And she had a man. A man who had chosen to stop. That evening, Grant sat alone in his house. He sat at a big oak table, set for 3. 2 plates sat empty across from him. His own plate was untouched. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the house felt cold. It always did. He stared at the Bible on the table. The leather was worn, the pages soft and yellowed from years of handling. It was his wife Sarah's Bible. She'd read it to him every night, her voice low and sweet, while their baby, Emma, slept in the cradle beside the fire. Grant traced the gold cross on the cover with one rough finger. He couldn't read the words inside. Not a single one. He'd never learned how. Sarah had promised to teach him. "Someday," she'd said, "when there's time." There hadn't been time. His mind pulled him back like it always did, 3 winters ago. Same house, same fire. But he'd been gone. 3 days late, coming back from a cattle sale in Cheyenne. The blizzard hit without warning, a whiteout, a howling monster of wind and ice. He'd ridden for 2 days straight, calling their names into the storm, his voice ripped away by the wind. When he finally made it home, the door was frozen shut. He'd kicked it open, falling inside, his lungs burning. The fire was dead. The house was silent, colder inside than it was out. He found them in the bed, wrapped in every quilt they owned. Sarah was holding Emma. The cold had taken them both. Peaceful, the doctor had said later, like falling asleep. Grant knew that was a lie. He'd buried them himself, on the hill overlooking the ranch. 2 graves, 2 simple wooden crosses, 2 lives he couldn't save. A knock at the door pulled him back to the present. He didn't answer. He never answered. But the door opened anyway. Clyde Harper stepped inside without invitation. Clyde was the town elder, the richest rancher, a hard man with a harder reputation. He owned the bank, the saloon, and half the town council. He stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "You're making fools of us, McCoy," Clyde said bluntly. No greeting. Grant didn't move. "How's that, Clyde?" "That. Woman," Clyde spit the word. "Giving her land, a cow. What's wrong with you?" "She's got a name," Grant said, his voice quiet. "Ruth Winslow." "I don't care what her name is." Clyde stepped into the room. "She's a vagrant, a beggar. Next thing you know, every beggar from here to Omaha will be knocking on our doors, expecting a handout. You've set a precedent." Grant stood up slowly. He was taller than Clyde, but thinner, worn down. "She's got land now," Grant said. "Got a cow. She ain't nobody. She's a landowner, same as you." Clyde's jaw tightened. "You can't save everyone, Grant. You couldn't save them." He nodded at the two empty plates. "You can't save this one." It was a cruel blow. It was meant to be. Grant's whole body tensed. He wanted to hit him. Instead, he just let the anger go. It left him empty. "Ain't trying to save everyone, Clyde," Grant said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just the one in front of me." Clyde stared at him for a long, long moment. He saw the grief in Grant's eyes. He saw the stubbornness. And he hated him for it. He hated him because Grant's grief made him soft, while Clyde's grief had made him hard. "You'll regret this, McCoy," Clyde said. "The town won't stand for it." He turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The house was silent again. Grant sat back down. He opened Sarah's Bible. He opened it to a random page, and his fingers traced the letters he couldn't decode. The pages blurred. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he'd start building Ruth a cabin. Not because it would bring Sarah and Emma back, but because 17 people had ridden past a woman in need, and he had almost been number 18. The dead don't rest easy when the living forget how to be human. His father used to say that, too. Grant figured his father was right about that. 2 weeks later, the snow had melted in patches. The world was a mess of mud and brown grass, and the promise of spring. Grant hauled the first load of timber to Ruth's land at dawn. She was already there, waiting. She had a small fire going. She'd made a lean-to out of brush. She'd been sleeping on the frozen ground for 2 weeks. But she was alive. She was a survivor. He saw that in her. No words were exchanged. He unhitched the wagon. He set to work. He notched logs. She measured and marked. Her hands were steady. Sure. He saw she knew her way around a hammer. "Your husband build houses?" Grant asked, breaking the long silence. "Carpenter," she said simply. She didn't look up. "Taught me. Before the fever took him. Another widower. Another life lost. This whole country was built on loss. They laid the foundation, stone by stone, each one placed with care, with weight. This was real. This was happening. By midday, the first wall frame stood, stark against the sky. Ruth stepped back, wiping her brow with a muddy sleeve. She reached out and touched the raw timber, like she was afraid it might vanish. "Haven't had walls," she said, her voice soft. "In 4 years." Grant nodded. He didn't press. He knew what it was like to live without walls, even when you were inside a house. Around noon, a wagon rattled up. It was the preacher's wife, Mrs. Calloway. She climbed down, holding a basket covered in a spotless checkered cloth. Her smile was thin as paper. "Mrs. Winslow," she said, nodding at Ruth, but looking her up and down like livestock at auction. "We heard about your situation, the ladies of the church. We thought you might need some Christian charity." She held out the basket. Ruth looked at the basket. Then she looked at Mrs. Calloway's face. She saw the judgment there, dressed up in kindness. She saw the pity, which was just another word for scorn. "I'm fine, ma'am," Ruth said evenly. "But thank you." Mrs. Calloway's smile faltered. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The beggar was supposed to be grateful. "Oh, it's no trouble," she insisted, pushing the basket forward. "I said," Ruth said, her voice a little colder now, "I'm fine." The smile vanished. Mrs. Calloway set the basket on the ground, hard. "Well, some people are just too proud to be helped," she said. She climbed back into her wagon, whipped her horse, and left in a cloud of dust. Ruth didn't watch her go. She picked up Grant's spare hammer, tested its weight. She nodded, and she went back to work. Grant smiled. The first time he'd smiled he couldn't remember. An hour later, another rider came, Tom Brindle, a rancher from the next valley over. He reined in his horse, looked at the rising cabin, then at Grant. "You're setting a bad precedent, McCoy," Tom said, his voice low. "Heard that one already," Grant said, not looking up from the log he was notching. "Folks will expect this kind of thing now," Tom pressed. "You're upsetting the order of things." "Then let it be set," Grant replied. Tom shook his head. "You always were a fool, Grant. Sarah's death should have taught you that. You can't fix the world." "Not trying to fix the world," Grant said. "Just building a house." "You're going to regret this," Tom said. He rode off. By sunset, the first wall stood complete. Ruth laid her hand flat against it. Her eyes were closed. Grant saw her lips move. Prayer or memory? He couldn't tell. They sat by a small fire outside the unfinished cabin as darkness fell. The air was cold, but the fire was warm. Ruth poked the coals with a stick. "Why?" she asked finally. The question he'd been waiting for. "Why are you doing this?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the fire, at the dark shapes of the land. "Because 17 people rode past you," he said, "and I was almost number 18. She looked at him then. She saw him. The sorrow carved into his face, the ghosts in his eyes. "You lost someone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Two someones," his voice was rough. "My wife, my daughter, 3 winters back, the blizzard." Ruth nodded slowly. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "They're in a better place." She knew those words were useless. She just nodded. Sometimes silence was the only decent response to grief. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. "Good fences make good neighbors," folks always said, "but good walls make a soul feel human again." Grant figured that was truer than most people knew. Night came, cold and clear. The cabin wasn't finished. It had 3 walls, and Grant had stretched canvas over the roof beams. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hold back the wind. Ruth built a fire in the makeshift hearth, stones piled in the corner. Grant sat across from her, his hands folded on his knees. He had brought his pack inside. Ruth pulled something from it. It was Sarah's Bible. The firelight made the gold cross on the cover glow like old gold. "You carry this everywhere," she said. He nodded. "But you don't read it." He looked up, surprised. "How'd you know?" "The pages," she said. "They're clean, worn from being held, but not from being read. And you asked Mr. Polk to read the deed to you, twice." He looked down, ashamed. "Can't," he admitted. "Never learned how." He touched the cover. "My wife, Sarah. She read it. Every night. Her voice. It was the last thing I heard before I went to sleep." His own voice broke. "Now it's just silence." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the book to the first page. "In the beginning," she read. Her voice was different from Sarah's. It was lower, rougher, but it was good. "I could teach you," she said, "if you want." Grant's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Because you gave me earth to stand on, she said simply. Least I can do is give you back some words. She pointed to the first line. In. Grant traced the letter I with his rough finger. He sounded it out like a child. In. The beginning. His voice broke on God created. He stopped. He wiped his eyes, quick and angry. It's all right, Ruth said gently. Grief don't have a schedule. They sat in the firelight, and then, slow and steady, like a river finding its path, Ruth told him her story. I was married young, 21, had a boy, Jacob, 2 years later. Her voice wavered, but it held. He was the sweetest child you ever saw, always laughing. She smiled, a small, sad smile. Fever took him when he was 6. She stopped, and her hand went to the burlap sack, still in her lap. She clutched it. The town doctor. He said I waited too long to call him, said I was unclean, said I used folk remedies. Her eyes flashed just for a second. He said maybe if I'd been smarter, quicker. She took a deep breath. The town turned on me. Mrs. Calloway, she was the first, called me cursed, said I'd brought sickness, said I killed my own boy. Grant's chest felt tight. They drove me out, threw stones, burned my house. But you stayed close, Grant said. The sheriff said, town's that way. Jacob, she whispered, he's buried in that cemetery, over the hill. She clutched the burlap sack. I couldn't leave him. I've been visiting his grave, sleeping in the woods, for 4 years. That's the only reason I'm still breathing. Ain't right, Grant said, his voice thick. Ain't right what they did. No, she said, but it's done. She looked at him. Ain't right what happened to your family either. But we're still here, she said, still breathing. Maybe that means something. Before Grant could answer, the cow. Mercy. She let out a low, urgent sound. They rushed outside. She was in the makeshift pen, her sides heaving. She'd gone into labor. Early. The cold, Ruth said. It's bringing it on. They worked together in the cold, under the light of a billion stars. Ruth, whose hands had brought herbs and healing, now brought new life. Grant, whose hands were strong from building, now steadied and soothed. The calf came, slick and shaking, impossibly small. They wrapped it in Grant's bedroll, carried it inside, and set it near the fire. New life, in the dead of winter, in a half-built cabin. Ruth's hand found Grant's on the calf's warm, wet side. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Ain't right, Grant said quietly. Me feeling this way. Feeling what way? Alive, he whispered. Ruth's fingers tightened around his. Maybe your wife, maybe Sarah, would want you to feel alive. Maybe, Ruth said. That's the best way to honor her. Outside, the stars were sharp and cold, but inside, by the fire, with a new calf breathing and 2 broken people holding hands, something warmer was growing. Spring don't ask winter's permission, Ruth's mother used to say. It just comes. Ruth was starting to believe that might be true, but winter wasn't done yet. The town hall smelled of old wood, stale tobacco, and older grudges. 12 men sat around a scarred oak table. Clyde Harper stood at the head, holding a ledger like it was a weapon. There's ordinances, gentlemen, Clyde said slowly, and then there's order. Murmurs around the table. Some nodded. Others, like the preacher, looked at their hands. This woman, Clyde said, Ruth Winslow. She has no legal residence, no kin, no history in this town. She's a vagrant, a public burden. But Clyde, the preacher said, his voice weak, she has a deed. Paid in full. Grant McCoy. Grant McCoy is a fool, Clyde snapped, a grieving fool, and his folly is not our law. He opened the ledger. Statute 14B. The town council reserves the right to reclaim land from vagrants, undesirables, and those who pose a risk to public health and order. On what grounds? The preacher asked. All of them, Clyde said. She was run out of this town once before, for negligence, for bringing sickness. Ask Mrs. Calloway, ask the doctor. I move to revoke the deed. Silence. All in favor, Clyde said. He raised his hand. One by one, 6 other hands went up. The bank owner, the saloon owner, the merchant who's whipped his horses, Tom Brindle, 7-5. The deed is revoked, Clyde said, slamming the ledger shut. 30 days' notice. It's legal. It's binding. Sheriff Dawes sat silent through it all. His face was tight. He didn't like it. But law was law. By dusk, the word had reached Grant. He rode into town like a storm. He didn't go to the town hall. He went to the saloon. He kicked the doors open. The piano stopped. Clyde Harper was at the bar, a whiskey in his hand. He turned, a slow smile on his face. McCoy, knew you'd be along. You got no right, Grant said. His voice was low, dangerous. The whole saloon was watching. I got every right, Clyde said, taking a sip. It's the law. Voted on. Proper. Legal don't mean just, Grant said, walking closer. Justice is what we decide it is, Grant, Clyde said. And we've decided we don't want her kind here. Her kind? A widow? A woman who's lost? We've all lost. Clyde slammed his glass on the bar. He leaned forward, his face inches from Grant's. You want to know why I'm doing this, McCoy? You want to really know? Because I lost a son, too, 10 years back, diphtheria. And when he was sick, Clyde's voice dropped to a whisper. This town, they brought food. They sat with my wife. They helped. This woman, she's not us. She's an outsider, and helping strangers. It won't bring your family back, and it won't bring mine either. Grant stared at him. He saw the wound, the raw, gaping wound beneath the cruelty. 2 men drowning in the same river. But it didn't change a damn thing. She's not leaving, Grant said. She's got 30 days, Clyde said, turning back to the bar. Sheriff will see to it. Grant turned and walked out. He rode to Ruth's cabin. She was finishing the door frame. Alone. She saw him coming. She read his face. She knew. They voted, he said. She nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just set down her hammer very gently. I've lost before, Grant, she said, her voice tired. I can lose again. No, he said. His voice was firm, final. Not this time. That night a storm rolled in, vicious and fast. The wind tore at the unfinished cabin. It tore the canvas roof clean off, sent it flying into the dark. Rain, cold and hard, poured through. Ruth stood in the wreckage, soaked and silent, clutching the calf. Mercy lowed, terrified. Grant watched from his horse on the ridge, rain dripping from his hat brim. 2 people, both drowning, both refusing to let go. He saw something else. Down by the creek bed, a flicker of light. 2 men on horseback, riding away. Fast. Tom Brindle and the sheriff's deputy. He looked back at the cabin. The wind, it hadn't torn the canvas. He saw the clean cuts. He rode down, dismounted. He found it, near the foundation. A half-burnt, oil-soaked rag. This wasn't a storm. This was an attack. They hadn't just voted her out. They were trying to burn her out. Law ain't always justice, his father used to say, and justice don't always wear a badge. Grant figured. He'd have to be the justice this time. Dawn came, soft and gray. Grant hadn't slept. He knelt between 2 graves on the hill. Sarah McCoy, Emma McCoy, The headstones were simple, clean. He kept them that way. He hadn't spoken aloud here in 3 years. Today, he did. "I'm afraid," he said quietly to the wind. "I'm afraid if I love again, I'll fail again, like I failed you. I'm afraid you'll think I forgot you." The wind just stirred the dry grass. No answer came. He hadn't expected one. "There's this woman, Ruth," he continued. "She's strong. She's kind. She's been hurt, worse than most. And I want to help her. But I don't know if I got the right." Footsteps behind him, small, careful. Grant turned. A boy stood there, maybe 9 years old. It was Eli, the blacksmith's orphaned nephew. The boy hadn't spoken a word since his mother died. 3 years back, same as Grant. Eli just watched. He held out a folded, muddy piece of paper. Grant took it, unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, in Ruth's handwriting. She'd been practicing her lessons. "You gave me earth to stand on," she'd written. "You reminded me goodness still lives. A man who builds shelter for strangers is building a better world." Grant read it twice, slowly, sounding out each word the way Ruth had taught him. Eli watched him, his eyes big. Then the boy whispered. The first words Grant had ever heard him speak. She cries at night." Eli's voice was a tiny, rusty thing. "She cries for her boy, like I cry for Mama." Grant's chest tightened. He looked at the boy, at the graves, at the letter. He looked at the sky where the storm clouds were breaking apart. Sunlight. "I think," Grant said, his voice rough. He was talking to Sarah, to Emma, to the wind. "I think you'd want me to choose life, even if it hurts." Eli nodded, his little face solemn. "Mr. Grant," Eli whispered again, Can I help you build?" Grant stood up. He looked down the hill. Decision made, absolute, final. He folded the letter, carefully. He put it in his pocket, over his heart. "Yeah, son," Grant said, "you can help." He put his hand on Eli's shoulder, and together they walked down the hill. "A man ain't measured by what he's lost," his father used to say, "but by what he does with what remains." Grant figured it was time to prove that true. Dawn broke, clear and cold. Grant rode down Main Street. Slowly. He didn't go to the land office. He didn't go to the saloon. He stopped at every door. The blacksmith, the general store owner, the doctor. He knocked. He spoke the same words. "I'm rebuilding Ruth Winslow's cabin today. The one that someone tried to burn down last night. You're either with decency or you're against it. Choose." Some doors stayed shut. The merchants, Tom Brindle's, but others opened. The blacksmith, Eli's uncle, came out, his hammer in his belt. The doctor. 3 ranchers Grant had known since they were boys. Even the preacher. His face was red with shame. I should have stood sooner, Grant," the preacher said. "You're standing now," Grant said. "That's what counts." By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, 7 men and 3 women stood in the street. With hammers, with saws, with nails, with Eli holding a jug of water. They rode together to Ruth's land. She was standing beside the wreckage. She hadn't slept. She was covered in mud. When she saw them coming, a small crowd. She flinched. She thought they were coming to run her off. Then she saw Grant at the front. She saw Eli. She saw the hammers. We're here to build, ma'am," one of the younger ranchers said, tipping his hat suddenly shy. Ruth's voice caught. She nodded. She couldn't speak. They worked. They worked like a machine. They worked with a fury. The blacksmith, a giant of a man, set the logs that had been pulled down. The women chinked the walls with mud and straw. The preacher, his sleeves rolled up, hammered shingles on the new roof. Ruth worked alongside them, hammering, lifting, steadying. Eli carried water. He handed nails. He never stopped moving. He was talking, in a low, steady stream, telling Ruth about his mama, about the blacksmith, about a stray dog. The townspeople stopped to listen. The boy who hadn't spoken in 3 years was talking. By afternoon, the cabin stood, whole, solid, a real door, a real roof. Then hoofbeats, 2 riders, Sheriff Dawes and Clyde Harper. Clyde held the eviction notice in his hand. The work stopped. Everyone turned. Clyde's face was hard, but his eyes were uncertain. He saw the cabin. He saw the crowd. He saw the talking boy. Grant stepped forward. He stood in the doorway, blocking it. "This is my timber, Clyde," he said, his voice even. "My sweat, my choice. You want her off this land, you go through me first." "It's the law, Grant," the sheriff said quietly. He looked tired. "I got a notice." "Then the law's wrong," Grant said. Silence. The crowd watched. Ruth stood in the cabin doorway behind Grant. Eli stood next to her, holding her hand. Clyde stared at Grant. He saw the man in front of him, a widower, grieving, but not broken. He saw himself, a man who'd let grief turn him into a monster. He looked at the new cabin. He looked at Eli, who was staring at him, unafraid. He looked at the eviction notice in his hand. It was just a piece of paper. It wouldn't bring his son back. It wouldn't fill the cold, empty house he lived in. Slowly, Clyde tore the notice in half. He let the pieces fall into the mud. "Keep your damn land, woman," he said, his voice rough. "And your cow." He turned his horse so fast it skittered. He rode away without looking back. The sheriff watched him go. He looked at Grant. He looked at Ruth. He tipped his hat. "There ain't no law," he said. "Says a man can't help his neighbor." He turned his own horse and followed Clyde. The crowd. They let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. A few people clapped. Others just smiled. By sunset, the door was hung. Ruth stood in the threshold, her threshold, for the first time in 4 years. Grant tipped his hat. "Welcome home, ma'am." He rode away slowly. Ruth watched until he was just a silhouette on the ridge. "A home ain't a building," Grant's father used to say. "It's the folks who decide you belong." Ruth figured that was the truest thing she'd ever heard. 3 months later, April came. It came soft and green. Wildflowers bloomed across Ruth's 10 acres. Blue lupine, yellow paintbrush, purple aster. It wasn't barren land after all. It just needed care. The cow, Mercy, grazed with her calf, both healthy and fat. Smoke rose, steady and sure, from the cabin chimney. Grant visited every week. He brought supplies. He stayed for supper. They sat by the fire, and they read the Bible together. Ruth teaching, Grant learning. His reading was slow, but it was steady. He could sound out most of Genesis on his own now. It was a courtship, but not for that. It was a courtship of healing, of 2 broken souls, fitting their jagged edges together. The town had softened too. The women, even Mrs. Calloway. They came to Ruth now. They came for her herb knowledge, for baking advice, for a kind ear. She became the unofficial healer, stitching wounds, easing fevers, listening to confessions. She was the heart of the town that had tried to cast her out. And Eli? Eli spoke in full sentences now. He helped Ruth with her garden. He chattered about everything and nothing. He'd started calling her Aunt Ruth. She didn't correct him. One morning, a bright Sunday morning, Ruth walked to the cemetery. She carried a basket of wildflowers. She went to her son Jacob's grave. She knelt there for a long, long time, speaking softly, telling him all about Eli, telling him she was okay. Then she stood up, and she walked to two other graves, Sarah McCoy, Emma McCoy. She laid flowers there, too. Grant saw her from the ridge. He rode down, dismounted. He stood beside her. They raised a good man, Ruth said quietly, touching Sarah's headstone. Grant's throat was tight. So did your boy, Grant said. He'd be proud, proud you kept going. They stood together in the morning light, two people who'd lost everything, two people who had learned to build again. You think the land remembers, Grant? Ruth asked. He thought about that. He thought about the cabin, the cow, the flowers on 4 graves. I think love does, he said finally. And maybe that's the same thing. Ruth's hand found his. He held it, gently. Down in the valley, the church bell rang. Sunday morning, calling the faithful home. They walked together down the hill toward town, toward life. Behind them, wildflowers swayed in the wind. 4 graves on a hillside, 4 souls remembered, 4 lives that mattered, and 2 people who'd chosen. Against fear, against grief, against a world that rode past. To stop, to build, to love again. The West was hard. It buried the weak and it broke the proud. But every so often someone proved that kindness could grow there too. That a man who stops when others ride past, he plants seeds. And those seeds, they become forests. The land don't forget, Grant's father used to say. It either buries you or it grows you. Depends on what you plant. Grant and Ruth, they had planted well. And spring, faithful, relentless, merciful spring, had come to prove it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe.